What is your view on legislation? Do you feel that this is something that Singapore should go down, a road that Singapore should go down? And do you also feel, or do you have a view as to what ought to be the limits of such legislation?
It is my view that some legislation will at some time be necessary because it will signal what the society approves of or does not approve of. But legislation has to be used as part of a multidimensional, multi-stakeholder approach, because if we are talking about deliberate online falsehoods as part of a strategic campaign, then it has to be dealt with at a strategic level. So legislation plus non-legislative measures.
Could you please expand a bit when you speak of a strategic level? I assume you're speaking of information operations, which is the second part of your submission, which covers multi-pronged strategic nature of information operations. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. I'm referring to information operations, which can include many different actors such as state-sponsored media from foreign countries, business organizations which have been infiltrated, NGOs that have been infiltrated, and various other things like people in the country itself that may be helping to spread the information.
And you're essentially referring to academics, and you use the example of Professor Huang Ching, who had his permanent residency revoked for being an agent of influence. You speak of deceptive websites designed to look like mainstream news. You speak of extreme or biased websites, and you refer to Breitbart and Infowars.com. You refer to organized teams of civilians, example, China's 50 Cent Army. Volunteer groups of civilians, example, China's Bring Your Own Grainers. Thereafter, you speak of information operations more extensively. You say information operations can work on slow burn issues that can be equally, if not more, pernicious. As part of a larger long-term strategy, the deliberate online falsehood may be a decoy, distraction, or ruse. The operation of law can even be manipulated strategically by the attacker. Can you explain the last sentence, please?
So the example that I suggested is that in extreme or deceptive websites, a series of them can post a series of stories about a sensitive topic over a period of time. And these can range from total falsehood, so they would qualify, to some which are half-truths or biased reporting, to stories which appear to be false, but are later can be shown to be true because of some hidden information. And these could be shared on social media platforms that can be read in a country. And these could also be taken down validly by operation of the relevant legislation. But what could then happen is that subsequently the fact that these stories have been taken down could then be used to create a narrative that there's a conspiracy to hide the information.
And do you feel that this is a real concern if and when, hypothetically, legislation is introduced to take down content, if there's no explanation or no reason as to why this information was deemed fake news, this is a real threat that people actually assume that this is an attempt at a cover-up or censorship?
Yes, in fact, I would say that if we're talking about a strategic campaign of disinformation, because my paper is focused on something which is at that level, then it would not just be the assumption of the public, but there would be a narrative to create a conspiracy theory around the removal of the information.
And do you think there are ways and means to combat this narrative? For example, a court process where if indeed fake news is transmitted online, the government or an entity or even an individual can go to court and seek for the removal of that fake news. Do you think that process can somewhat dilute this? I would think it's a real concern of a narrative of the government wanting to censor or some entity wanting to censor. Do you think a court process could be helpful?
Definitely a court process would be helpful.
I move on to three 3.2, the heading which starts 3.2, conspiracy theories and the backfire effect of corrections. Alternatively, instead of taking down the story, the government may want a right, to respond to deliberate online falsehood, compelling platforms to publish an official correction. This assumes that the platforms will find a way to make the corrections visible alongside the falsehoods and any variants. Would you agree that this may be logistically and practically very difficult, given the wide range of platforms and mediums through which fake news is transmitted?
Yes, I agree there should be some logistical difficulties.
You go on to speak of the issue we discussed about China's aggressive efforts to censor social media posts, and these have instead reinforced some users' belief that the censored posts are true, while dismissing officially sanctioned newspapers as government propaganda. In this state, these users are more likely to seek and trust news from alternative sources than from official sources. In your view, do you think this problem exists in Singapore and in the Singapore context?
In the Singapore context, at this current point in time, this might not be an issue, but we are looking at the future.
Okay. I refer to the section which starts at 3.4, perceptions and legitimacy. And you speak of Germany, for example, starting to introduce laws requiring social media platforms to even take down content. And you say that this has led to fears that legislation against online falsehoods can be misused to suppress criticism and to erode freedom of speech. Legitimacy in the exercise of power is much greater when it is limited and not left to any authority's unfettered discretion. This is helped by transparency in decision-making and meaningful checks and balances. And the next line says checks and balances can come from, as you gave evidence earlier, one, creating a judicial process to execute the law, and number two, and I find this interesting, creating an independent multi-stakeholder body to review decisions. Can you share with the committee what do you mean by creating an independent multi-stakeholder body to review decisions? What do you have in mind?
One of the concerns here, when you're looking at a strategic campaign, is that this information will be coming from a multi-pronged attack. So there will be different aspects of the information campaign which are not known to any particular, which might not be known to a particular organization that is looking at the deliberate online falsehood that has arisen. So it would require a more cross-sectional group that has a greater awareness of other factors which may be in play, that there is a wider objective in this particular campaign to create a particular conspiracy or to create a particular narrative. And so having a multi-stakeholder group enables a wider range of views and inputs to help to make the decision of how to respond.
And who would be the representatives of this multi-stakeholder group, and who would fund it? Or would it be entirely volunteer-based?
That would be...
I don't mean to put you in a spot. I mean, if you have considered these, please share them. But if you have not, it's all right.
Yes. The stakeholders should have representation from the public sector and private sector, and as well as civil society. And as for the funding, the difficulty of having government funding, of course, is that then it may not be seen to be independent. But as to who else would fund it, I think that is an open question.